The access log showed someone clocking in at 2:13 a.m. That wouldn't have meant anything, except the building had been closed for 14 months. No active staff, no scheduled maintenance, no authorized access. And I was the only one assigned to monitor it. At first, I assumed it was a system error, a leftover credential, something that hadn't been properly decommissioned. But the entry appeared again the next night. Same time, same badge ID, clock in, clock out, like someone was still working there. That's when I started checking everything, the logs, the power usage, the internal systems, because whatever was happening inside that building, it wasn't random. I was between contracts when the assignment came through. 3 months of facilities monitoring at a decommissioned municipal building on the east side of the city, a place called the Kirsch Administrative Center. The pay was reasonable. The work, as described by the regional property management firm that hired me, was simple. Visit the building 3 times per week. Verify that climate systems were holding within acceptable ranges. Check for water intrusion. Confirm that security panels were functional. And file a brief digital report at the end of each visit. The building had been closed for 14 months, following a consolidation of city services into a newer campus across town. It was slated for eventual sale or demolition, but until a decision was made, someone needed to keep an eye on the place. That someone was now me. I'd done similar work before. After 15 years in building operations and systems management, I'd learned that empty buildings are in many ways harder to care for than occupied ones. Without people generating heat and moving air and noticing problems, an unoccupied structure deteriorates quickly. Pipes freeze. Mold colonizes drywall. Roof leaks go unnoticed for weeks and ruin entire floors. My job was to catch these things before they became catastrophic, and I was good at it. I say this not out of vanity, but because it matters later. I was methodical. I was careful. I noticed things. My first visit was on a Tuesday in early November. The property management company had couriered me a set of keys, an access badge, and a thin folder containing the building's basic specs. The Kirsch Center was a 5-story concrete and glass structure built in the late 1980s, roughly 60,000 square feet. It had housed various city departments, records, permits, some kind of internal auditing office on the upper floors. The folder included a site map, emergency contacts, and a login for the building's management system, which was still running on a local server in the basement mechanical room. There was no active internet connection. Everything was self-contained. I arrived around 9 in the morning. The parking lot was empty and cracked, with weeds pushing through the expansion joints. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, and I used a key to open the padlock on the vehicle gate. The building itself looked exactly as you'd expect an abandoned administrative center to look. Blinds drawn on every window. A few panels of exterior cladding stained with rust from aging fasteners. The main entrance doors secured with a heavy-duty deadbolt. I unlocked the doors, stepped inside, and was met with the particular stillness that only truly empty buildings possess. Not silence, exactly. The HVAC system was running on a minimal schedule, and I could hear the low hum of it cycling somewhere deep in the structure. But an absence of human activity so total that the air itself felt different, thicker, more present. The lobby was clean but dated. Institutional carpet in a shade of teal that no one had chosen since 1993. A reception desk with nothing on it. Directories on the wall listing departments that no longer existed in this location. I spent the first hour walking the building floor by floor, getting a feel for the layout. Everything was orderly. Desks had been left in most offices, chairs pushed in, computers removed. The city had taken what it needed and left the furniture. Some rooms still had papers in the drawers, but I didn't bother with those. Not my concern. The mechanical room was in the basement, as expected. The server rack for the building management system was in a small alcove off the main mechanical space, still powered on and blinking steadily. I logged in, using the credentials from my folder, and spent some time familiarizing myself with the interface. It was an older system. I'd worked with similar ones, but functional. It tracked HVAC performance, electrical loads on each floor, fire panel status, and somewhat to my surprise, door access events. The badge reader system was apparently still active. I checked the log and found what I expected to find. A single entry for that morning, time-stamped 9:07 a.m., showing my badge number at the main entrance. Everything was in order. I completed my inspection, filed my first report, and left by 11. I locked the building behind me and drove home, feeling satisfied. The work was straightforward. The building was quiet. I had no complaints. For the first 2 weeks, my visits followed the same pattern. I would arrive, badge in, walk the building, check the mechanical systems, log into the BMS to review any alerts or anomalies, file my report, and leave. The building was consistent. Temperatures held, no water intrusion. The fire panel reported no faults. I began to settle into the rhythm of it, which is a dangerous thing in monitoring work because it means you start to see what you expect to see rather than what is actually there. I was aware of this tendency and actively guarded against it. On each visit, I forced myself to check at least one thing I hadn't checked before. A different stairwell, a storage room I'd previously passed over, a mechanical closet on an upper floor. It was during one of these deliberate deviations that I first noticed something I couldn't immediately explain. I was on the 4th floor in what had been the auditing department, checking a bathroom for signs of leaking fixtures. The faucets were dry, which was normal since the water was still on, but the fixtures hadn't been used in over a year. As I was leaving, I passed through the main open-plan office area and noticed that one of the desk chairs had been pulled out from its desk. Not dramatically, just a few inches, as if someone had stood up and not pushed it back in. I stopped and looked at it. I was certain, with the kind of certainty that comes from professional habit, that every chair on this floor had been pushed in during my first walkthrough. I had noticed it specifically because the uniformity had been striking. Every desk, every chair, perfectly aligned. It was the kind of thing a closing crew does when they know someone might walk through later. I pushed the chair back in and made a note in my report. 4th floor desk chair displaced. Possible settling or vibration from HVAC. No other disturbances noted. I didn't think about it further. Buildings move. Things shift. It meant nothing. On my next visit, a Friday, I checked the 4th floor more carefully. Every chair was in place. But when I logged into the BMS to review the access log, I found something that gave me a moment of genuine pause. Between my last visit on Wednesday and my current visit on Friday, the access log showed an additional badge event. It was time-stamped Thursday at 8:46 a.m. The badge number was not mine. I stared at the entry for a long time. The building was supposed to be unoccupied. No one else had been assigned to it. The property management company had made that clear during my onboarding. The city had no remaining operations here. There was no cleaning crew, no security patrol. No one. I wrote down the badge number and the timestamp and continued my inspection with a slightly elevated sense of attention. I checked every door, every room, every stairwell. The building was empty. Nothing was out of place. When I got home, I emailed the property management company and asked whether anyone else had authorized access to the building. I included the badge number from the log. Their response came the following Monday. No, they confirmed. I was the only person currently assigned to the Kirsch Center. They suggested the log entry might be a system artifact, old data surfacing due to a software glitch, or a ghost record from before the building was decommissioned. They said this was not uncommon in older badge systems, and that I should note it in my reports, but not be concerned. I accepted this explanation. It was plausible. Badge systems, especially ones running on isolated legacy servers, did strange things. Data corruption, clock drift, phantom entries from failing hardware. I had seen it before. I made a note and moved on. But the entries continued. Over the next 3 weeks, the access log recorded a badge event on nearly every day I was not in the building. The timestamps were remarkably consistent, always between 8:30 and 9 a.m., always a clock in. And I noticed after a week of paying closer attention, always a clock out. The clock out times varied more. Sometimes 4:15 p.m., sometimes 5:30 p.m., occasionally as late as 6:47 p.m. But the pattern was unmistakable. Someone or something was logging a full workday in the building on the days I was not there. The badge number was always the same. I had written it down. 1187-W. I searched the BMS for any associated records and found nothing. The system's employee database had been partially wiped during decommissioning, but the fragments that remained contained no match for that number. It was a ghost in the system, clocking in and out of an empty building with the regularity of a career employee. I began to adjust my visits. Instead of my usual Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday schedule, I came in on a Wednesday without warning. The access log for that Wednesday showed only my entry. I checked the log for the Tuesday I'd skipped. There it was. 1187-W clocked in at 8:51 a.m., clocked out at 5:12 p.m. It was as if the badge holder knew my schedule and worked around it. I called the property management company again. This time I was more insistent. I told them the badge entries were not random artifacts. They followed a pattern. They occurred on specific days. They showed realistic work hours. Someone was either entering the building or the system was generating entries with a logic that I could not identify. The woman on the phone was polite but unworried. She told me she would flag it with their IT consultant and asked me to continue monitoring. She used the phrase like legacy system behavior twice. I requested the full badge database. I wanted to know who had been issued badge 1187-W. She said she would look into it. In the meantime, I began my own investigation. On my next visit, I brought a roll of transparent tape and placed small strips across the seams of every exterior door. A simple intrusion detection method I'd learned years ago. If anyone opened a door, the tape would break or shift. I also began examining the building more carefully for any signs of habitation. I checked trash cans. I checked bathrooms for wet sinks or recently used fixtures. I walked the stairwells looking for scuff marks. I found nothing. The building was pristine in its emptiness. No one had been here. And yet, 1187-W continued to clock in. This is when the nature of the problem began to change for me. An unauthorized person entering the building was a security issue. Manageable. Concrete. But an entity that existed only in the system, that followed a schedule, that responded to my presence, that was something else. I was no longer troubleshooting an access control glitch. I was watching something behave. I started spending more time in the basement at the BMS terminal. I pulled up every log I could access. Not just badge events, but HVAC activity, electrical load data, lighting schedules. The building's electrical consumption should have been essentially flat. Just the BMS server, the minimal HVAC schedule, and whatever parasitic loads came from idle equipment. But when I graphed the daily electrical data, I found something that made me sit very still in my chair. On the days when 1187W clocked in, the building's electrical load increased by a small but measurable amount. It was consistent, a bump of roughly 0.3 kilowatts that appeared shortly after the clock-in time and disappeared around the clock-out time. It was the kind of load you'd see from a single workstation, a computer, a desk lamp, maybe a small space heater. I went floor by floor, checking every outlet, every power strip, every piece of equipment that remained in the building. Nothing was plugged in, nothing was drawing power. The desks were bare. The outlets were empty. I checked the electrical panels on each floor and found no anomalies. The load increase was real. The BMS was recording it. But I could not find its physical source. I want to be precise about what I felt at this point because I think precision matters. I was not frightened. I was unsettled in the way that a competent professional becomes unsettled when the data contradicts reality. I had two streams of information. The physical building, which showed no evidence of any presence, and the digital systems, which showed clear patterned evidence of a regular occupant. One of these had to be wrong. I believed it was the system. I believed this firmly. Because the alternative, that someone was in the building, invisible, drawing power from nowhere, opening no doors, leaving no trace, was not something I was prepared to consider. But there was an entry dated the previous Tuesday at 3:17 p.m. The text of the entry read, "Checked HVAC, supply air dampers, floors 2 through 4. All operational. No issues found." I read it 3 times. The language was professional. The task described was routine building maintenance. It was exactly the kind of entry a facilities engineer would make during a normal workday. Someone was not just clocking in. Someone was working. The entry was attributed to a user ID I did not recognize. But when I cross-referenced it with the access log, The timestamp fell within the window of 1187W's shift. The BMS had no network connection. There was no way for someone to enter data remotely. The entry existed anyway. I typed a test entry into the maintenance log. Test entry, made by me. Confirming system access. I saved it. I logged out. I logged back in. The entry was there, and beneath it was a response. Acknowledged. I could recall arriving. I could recall leaving. The hours in between were present, but soft, like memories of a dream. A report had been filed for that day under my login. The inspection notes were thorough, accurate, written in my professional voice. I did not file that report. I arrived at 8:52 a.m. 1187W clocked out at 8:53 a.m. 1 minute after my arrival, as has become our routine. The shift had been handed off. 1187W was not an intruder, not a glitch, not a ghost. 1187W was the building's other shift. The building required monitoring. The work continued. Reports were being filed. Everything was functioning correctly. I will note it in my next report and continue regular monitoring.